This company ruined millions of beers to save 3 cents. And by the time they realized their mistake, their entire multi-billion-dollar empire was literally down the drain. In the middle of the 20th century, beer wasn't just a drink in America, it was a cultural religion. And sitting on the high throne of this kingdom was the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company. Founded in 1849, this Milwaukee-born behemoth built an empire on a simple, uncompromising promise: pure, high-quality, perfectly crafted lager. They coined the legendary slogan, "the beer that made Milwaukee famous." For decades, Schlitz was synonymous with blue-collar reward and middle-class celebration. They operated massive, state-of-the-art breweries that pumped out millions of barrels of golden liquid every year. By the early 1970s, they were the second-largest brewery in the entire world, snapping aggressively at the heels of the undisputed king, Anheuser-Busch. Schlitz was an absolute juggernaut, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, boasting an intensely loyal customer base, and possessing a brand equity that seemed entirely bulletproof. If you walked into any bar from New York to San Francisco, you would see neon Schlitz signs glowing warmly in the windows. It was a golden era of American manufacturing, where prestige and profitability danced in perfect harmony. But behind the closed doors of the corporate boardroom, a silent, deadly shift was taking place. The traditional brewmasters, who viewed beer as an art form, were slowly being pushed out by a new breed of executive, the bean counters. Enter Robert Uihlein Jr., who took the reins of Schlitz in 1961. Uihlein was not a brewer, he was a corporate strategist obsessed with one thing above all else: profit margins. To Uihlein, the traditional brewing process was painfully slow, inefficient, and unnecessarily expensive. While old-school brewmasters insisted that a great lager required a minimum of 40 days of slow, cold fermentation to achieve its smooth, crisp taste, Uihlein saw 40 days of wasted warehouse space and frozen capital. He wanted to unlock explosive growth and maximize shareholder value, and he believed the secret lay in modern chemical engineering. He introduced a process known as accurate fermentation. By raising the temperature and adding chemical accelerators, Schlitz managed to slash the brewing cycle from 40 days down to just 15. To the executives, this was a miracle of modern efficiency. They could now produce nearly 3 times as much beer in the same amount of time without building a single new factory. But Uihlein didn't stop there. He looked at the raw ingredients. High-quality barley was expensive. Corn syrup, on the other hand, was dirt cheap. Uihlein ordered the brewmasters to substitute a significant portion of the premium barley with cheap, industrial corn syrup. On paper, the savings were astronomical. The company was saving pennies on every single can produced. Across millions of barrels, those pennies translated into tens of millions of dollars in pure, unadulterated profit. The board of directors cheered. The stock price soared. But in their rush to optimize the balance sheet, they forgot one fundamental rule of business: you cannot cheat the consumer forever. As the brewing cycle was slashed and the premium ingredients were stripped away, the physical nature of the beer began to change. The legendary, robust flavor of Schlitz was replaced by a thin, watery, slightly metallic liquid that tasted more like carbonated chemicals than traditional German lager. Loyal customers began to notice that the beer lacked its signature rich taste, but the executives dismissed these complaints as mere psychological resistance to change. However, a much more pressing physical problem emerged. Because the fermentation process had been artificially accelerated, the beer began to lose its head, the thick, foamy layer at the top of the glass that draft beer drinkers hold dear. Without a stable foam head, the beer looked flat, dead, and unappealing the moment it was poured. To fix this cosmetic disaster, Schlitz engineers turned to chemistry. They began adding an artificial silica gel stabilizer to the brew, which successfully held the foam together. But then, the hand of fate intervened. In the mid-1970s, the United States Food and Drug Administration began drafting strict new regulations. The FDA proposed that all food and beverage companies must disclose every single ingredient and chemical additive on their packaging labels. The executives at Schlitz panicked. They knew that if consumers saw silica gel stabilizer printed on the side of their favorite blue-collar beer, it would trigger a massive public relations nightmare. They needed a workaround, and they needed it fast. To avoid listing the silica gel on the label, Schlitz chemists scrambled to find an alternative. They settled on a newly developed, proprietary enzyme called ChillGuard. This chemical agent prevented haze and maintained the foam head without technically needing to be listed on the label under the proposed FDA guidelines. It seemed like the perfect corporate loophole. They immediately rolled out the new formula across all of their massive production lines, pumping millions of gallons of the altered beer into aluminum cans and glass bottles, which were then shipped to distributors across the country. But wait. It gets so much worse. What the chemists failed to test was how ChillGuard would behave when left on retail shelves for extended periods, or when subjected to varying temperatures during shipping. The results were catastrophic. Inside the dark, sealed chambers of millions of cans, a silent chemical reaction began to take place. The ChillGuard enzyme began to bind with a specific protein naturally present in the cheap corn syrup they were using. As the days turned into weeks, this chemical bond caused the proteins to coagulate, forming tiny, solid particles. When unsuspecting consumers cracked open a cold can of Schlitz and poured it into a glass, they were horrified. Floating throughout the golden liquid were thousands of tiny, gooey, white, mucus-like flakes. It looked exactly like phlegm suspended in beer. The initial reaction from the public was one of utter disgust. Bartenders across America began receiving furious complaints from customers who thought they were being served spoiled, moldy, or poisoned beer. Word of the Schlitz flakes spread like wildfire through the grapevine of working-class bars. The company's immediate response was a masterclass in corporate denial. They tried to downplay the issue, claiming it was a harmless visual anomaly that did not affect the safety or taste of the beverage. But consumers didn't care if the mucus-like chunks were safe to drink, they were physically repulsed. Desperate to stop the bleeding, Schlitz executives made a secret, fatal decision. Instead of issuing a transparent, nationwide recall and apologizing to their loyal customer base, they attempted to quietly buy back and destroy over 10 million cans of beer from distributors' warehouses. They disguised this massive operation as a routine inventory rotation. But the scale of the operation was too massive to hide. The media caught wind of the secret buyback, and the story exploded onto the front pages of newspapers nationwide. The trust that Schlitz had built over more than a century was vaporized in a matter of weeks. The public realized that not only had the company ruined their favorite beer, but they had also actively lied about it. Market share began to plummet at an unprecedented rate. In a desperate, last-ditch effort to save the brand, Schlitz fired their advertising agency and launched a bizarre, aggressive marketing campaign that would go down in history as one of the worst executive blunders ever conceived. The new advertising campaign, known as the Schlitz Challenger ads, featured tough, intimidating men, including a rugged lumberjack, a boxer, and a wild animal tamer with a live tiger. In the commercials, an off-screen voice would suggest that they try a different brand of beer. The actor would stare directly into the camera with an intense, almost threatening glare, and aggressively declare that they would never switch from Schlitz, implying that anyone who did was weak or foolish. The tone of the commercials was incredibly hostile and bizarrely tense. To the American public, it didn't feel like an invitation to drink beer, it felt like a hostage video. Viewers felt threatened and insulted by the very brand that was begging for their business. The campaign backfired spectacularly, driving away whatever remaining customers they had left. By 1978, Schlitz had lost over 90% of its market value. The final, crushing blow came in 1979, when the frustrated, underpaid workers at the Milwaukee brewery went on a massive, prolonged strike over wage cuts and deteriorating working conditions. Unable to produce beer, and with their reputation completely destroyed, Schlitz was forced to permanently close their historic Milwaukee plant, the very place where the empire was born. In 1982, the broken, bankrupt carcass of the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company was acquired by its rival, the Stroh Brewery Company, for a mere fraction of what the empire was once worth. A brand that had taken more than a century of meticulous craftsmanship to build was utterly destroyed in less than a decade, sacrificed on the altar of short-term corporate greed. If you thought this corporate self-sabotage was insane, wait until you see how another beverage giant destroyed their own product in our video about the new Coke disaster.